Hello and welcome to a deck profile for the standard format, this time covering Order Shiranui. Shiranui, if you've been following standard, has been the best deck for quite some time now, with tournament results both in the global format and the Japanese format putting it head and shoulders above the competition. But it's about to get hit by a ban list update, which will take away two important tools. The first being the Dragon Empire Overtrigger, Drag Veda. Uh, we will now be forced to play a suboptimal Overtrigger. And second, we are going to be forced to play the Ride Line from the Stride deck set. Uh, this Ride Line is much worse than the Shoujo Doji Grade 2 that we used to play, which gave us access to Stealth Fiend Izasao, which, when combined with each other, gave us a really powerful card selection package on turn 2, opening up good early rush, good grade 2 gaming to deny strides in the mirror and against other stride decks, as well as just filtering for our best pieces and drawing too many cards to be early rushed out of the game. This ride line is significantly weaker, and now all Shiranui players must find alternatives to the Izasao stealth package. And so we're playing an order package in order to make up for some of that early card selection and grade 2 game potential. Without any further ado, let's get into the list. This is the ride line you must play now in Shiranui. You do not have a choice. Madoi, Seizui, Genkai, Shiranui. Genkai is the notable change. If you're unfamiliar with this card, what it does is when it's ridden over, you call it out of soul and soul charge 1, and then you force your opponent to call a card from drop. That's really good if your opponent's strategy for denying your dominates was to not have any units in play, because you can force them to play one out of the drop zone and give yourself a target. And then when dominated unit attacks, you can counterblast one, give it 10k, and this unit gains boost. You'll use that effect when you have excess counterblast, because Shiranui can be pretty counterblast efficient when it wants to be. And then let's get to the G Zone, which is just 8 cards and is just 4 copies of Magen Tenbu, 4 copies of Mukuro. These are the only legal options to play. You go into Magen Tenbu first, and then you go into Mukuro second. Not much else to say. If you've been familiar with this deck before, you already know what these cards do. And then next is the main deck. And we'll start with the Shiranui half of the deck. 2 copies of Shiranui Oboro. This is the grade 3 you must discard if you want to stride into Mukuro, which is the more powerful of the 2 strides. So you need to play some copies of this, and occasionally rewriting into Oboro will give you the extra soul you need to make sure you can do a full power turn. But we have ways to search for this card, so we don't need 4, and we don't benefit from Persona Ride. Next up is our Stride Farter, Bleorvis. We are no longer playing Shoujo Doji and Izasao, so there's no need to have stealth names in the deck anymore. So we can play this Stride Fodder, which is slightly better than Stealth Dragon Shiranui. This one draws a card when it's discarded to ride up to grade 3, as well as when it's used to pay for Stride, which is a nice little plus. And occasionally we'll use the other effect where when you place it, if you have a grade 4 Vanguard, which we will whenever we Stride, you can retire something and it gets power. We do not play any Virina Esperidia in this variant of the deck, so the second effect of being a 15k guard, if we reveal a grade 4, is not usable. Next up is our Restanders, and we're playing 4 copies of Furai and 2 copies of Sekie. Furai is the stronger of the 2. It gets more power, it gets its power earlier, it isn't restricted to GB2, and just hits better numbers, whereas Sekie will gain 10k and draw a card when it restands, and the card draw can be quite valuable. So these are both pretty good cards, but Furai is going to be better on our first stride, and is going to be a better closer when we're just trying to end the opponent's life. So we play 4 copies of this one and 2 copies of this, and because Shiranui has recently received a bunch of good Dragon Empire generic cards, we don't need to play 8 copies of these anymore, especially factoring in that the average player is significantly better about playing against Shiranui these days, so they're going to be looking to deny you dominates more often, and so a lot of times on your first stride, you simply won't have anything to dominate, and the Restanders won't be useful. Next up is Tenrei. This grade 1 counterblasts and draws a card when you place it, and it bounces back to hand when a dominate attack hits. Reusable card draw is always good. We don't have a ton of uses for counterblast in this deck, so we can often save counterblast for this and Magen Tenbu, and it's fine. And the ability to bounce itself when a dominate attack hits will often force the opponent to guard awkwardly on attacks that they wanted to no guard to hit defensives. And then we have Katar Gitsune. This is the grade 3 searcher of the deck. It finds a Boro, or it can be pitched to Shride. You're usually going to use it to find a Boro, because a Boro can do both of those things, pitch to Stride and pitch to Mukuro. And this can only pitch to Magen Tenbu, so it's usually better to just find an Aboro and deck thin. You can also pick up an Aboro from drop, which is important, so make sure you always count the number of Aboros that are in your damage, hand, and soul before you search the deck for anything. Because sometimes you'll have no copies and all the Aboros in your hand, and then you'll basically waste a card for no reason. Next up is the best grade 1 in the deck, Stealth Dragon Shenri, or Stealth Fiend Shenri. What this card does is if you've played a normal order this turn, that'll be important later, or if your opponent has one or less rear guards, it becomes a 13k booster, and it goes into soul and draws a card at the end of the battle it boosted. We are going to be very good at proccing that effect compared to other versions of this deck, so we get a lot of mileage out of this card. And it does everything Shiranui wants. It provides early pressure, it draws cards, and it builds soul to pay for our Restanders and Mukuro. Next up is the order package, starting with 1 Bracing Angel Ladder and 4 copies of Special Order Mountain Roast Breath of the Flame Dragon. The barbecue order is what I'll refer to this as for the rest of the video. Bracing Angel Ladder is a staple card in the format right now. It's really good against Shiranui specifically, so it helps us win the mirror match. It also will help protect our Restanders against any decks that want to retire them. And this is the unique order that we're playing that other Shiranui decks aren't. What this does is for Energy Blast 2, you look at the same number of cards from the top of your deck as the number of your opponent's open circles. You choose up to 1 unit card with a grade less than or equal to your Vanguard from among them, and you call it to R and then shuffle deck. And if your opponent's rear guard has been retired by card ability this turn, the called unit gets 5k. If we have used Magen Tenbu's effect, we actually can get the bonus 5k, but we're usually trying to play this on turn 2, where we will not have access to it. In the early game, this will often look at up to 4 or 5 cards and then call whatever you want out of there, which can very easily help us build a board off of essentially just 1 card in hand. Sometimes we can commit 0 cards that don't replace themselves and build a full board off of just this order. But the downside is that it costs energy, so we can't play the energy cycler in this variant of the deck. So we lose out on some defensive power that the regular Shiranui deck gets, but the advantage is that unlike Forward and Revertis, which is the usual option people are playing, we can get our early rush and early plussing without spending any counterblast. And this has 2 advantages. One, it means the opponent's damage denial can't stop us from building a board and grade 2 gaming them. And second, it means that if our opponent gave us 1 damage on turn 1, then we can just simply save that counterblast and always have it available to use Magen Tenbu. So our opponent will be less able to deny us options on our first stride by taking advantage of the fact that we had to flip that damage for what we used to have to spend it on, which was Izasao. To complement this order card, we are playing a package of grade 2s and grade 1s. First off is the grade 2 Latifa. This has a similar effect to Teeth Fault. It's part of the same cycle, where if you played an order this turn and you place this unit by other than unit card ability, you Soul Blast 1, you look at the top 5, and you call a unit or add an order to hand. And then when it attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, it gets 5k for every open R in the same column. So it's a slightly weaker version of Teeth Fault, because Teeth Fault just gets 10k all the time. But this synergizes really well with our barbecue order and with our Shenris. If we can use this to dig for additional copies of Shenri or for additional copies of itself, we can really churn through the deck on turn 2 and just flood the board with units. And the fact that Shenri replaces itself means that we'll be, if we call it off of this effect, we'll be essentially plussing. And if we call Shenris from hand, we will be not losing any resources because it'll replace itself, and we'll be making up for the Soul Blast cost for this ability. So even though this conflicts with our Restanders and Mukuro, it's pretty much fine because we get more Shenri activations than average in this deck. Next up is our grade 1. This is part of the Order Searcher package from set 2. When this unit is placed on R from hand, if you did not play an order, you discard a card and you search for an order, put it in the drop. Has to be an order without Regulus piece, which it matters. And then you can play the order from the drop that turn, and it goes to bottom of deck instead of the drop zone. This just makes sure that we can find the barbecue order on turn 2 every game, essentially giving us 6 copies of the card. And it's a vanilla 8k after that, which is not the end of the world. Crest power means that our numbers will be good, even if our units aren't gaining additional power, so it's fine. But just being able to always get the barbecue order on any turn where we need it is really strong. And then we have the perfect guards. We're no longer playing Aegisau, so there's no need to play stealth PGs. Just play whatever PG you want. And then one copy of Elementaria, because Elementaria is the best PG in the game. And then for the triggers, the only important triggers are the effect crits. You must play 4 of these. They will help build Soul for the Restanders and Mukuro. And that means that you can often surprise your opponent with how many multi-attacks you can do and whether you can activate your Vanguard skill or not. They'll count your Soul and be like, oh, my opponent only has 1 card in Soul, they can't do anything, and then you'll play this and boost with it, and you'll get an extra attack that they weren't expecting. And then for vanilla crits, it doesn't matter which ones you play, just play whatever artwork you like. And then the heals, I'm currently playing 1 effect heal and 3 vanilla heals. You can play 2-2. You can play all vanilla heals. Just don't play 4 effect heals. In my opinion, that's bad unless you really know what you're playing against. Like if your locals is 8 Zorga players, the crit heal will be fantastic. But this heal in particular is mostly because the only matchup we're really scared of in Shiranui is Mygo and the mirror match. And a restand heal will solve both of those matchups or help us defend against both of those matchups. And if you're considering the meta at large, though, and not what your problem matchups are, though, the crit heal does have a lot of appeal. The crit heal stops Zorga. It's helpful against Blangdemeyer. There's a couple other decks that it's good against. It's good against Luard for hard guarding the Drag Strider if you don't have an Elementaria. Things like that. So there's technically, I think, more decks where the crit heal matters than the restand heal, especially since a lot of decks multi-attack are like superior call multi-attack instead of restanding. So that's something to consider. However, this is also good against Varga, which is nice. And you really do need to guard aggressively against Varga to avoid going up to 4. And then we have 3 fronts. You cannot play draws in this deck or you'll deck out, in my experience. And fronts are really good in a deck with restanders because you'll always have 3 things in the front row gaining the 10k power on any late game turn. And this also makes guard math for your opponent awkward because they'll have to consider if they want a 2 to pass you, knowing that you could hit fronts and not have to trick yourself into making the wrong play. And saving brain power by not having to think about breaking 2 to passes, just, oh, you hit a front? Okay, I don't have to think about whether I put it on the Vanguard or on a rear guard. I get it everywhere. Fronts are really good. And then the overtrigger. I'm currently playing the Darkness OT. The advantage of this is that we're a late game deck. We want to get to the 2nd or 3rd stride and then scale with our immense crest power. And a trigger that heals is going to get us there more consistently. The red OT can also be a really strong option because it can give a restand or 100 million and swing with it twice, which will be somewhat similar to the power we used to get with the Dragon Empire OT. The blue OT is always solid because it picks up any card from our drop and gives us a crit. And I would probably not play the light OT. This deck already has deck out problems. Drawing the extra cards might kill you. And it's unlikely that retiring the opponent's board is really going to benefit us when we want to have things to dominate. So those are the considerations. It's really this, the red or the blue one, in my opinion. There's a really niche argument for the vanilla OT where you get the vanilla OT and you put it on 2 restanders, and then if you did that on the Mukuro drive check on the Vanguard Dominate, then your restanders will get like 4 swings with 100 million, which can be very disgusting and unbeatable. But I think it's the dark one is the best one because while it's got a lower power ceiling than some of these other options, the heal is really, really good. So that's the deck, and let me give you an example of how powerful this order package can be. So let's say that we have a Shenri in hand and a barbecue order, and it's turn 2. Let's assume that we went first for the sake of argument. So we have Genkai as our Vanguard, no other units in play. We play a barbecue order, we check the top 5, and let's say that we get lucky and we hit a Latifa. We hit a Latifa. Latifa checks the top 5. Let's say we get slightly less lucky and we hit a Restander. This Shenri and this Latifa will be an excellent column, hitting for 23. So if our opponent hits any defensives, this will still hit. Getting a Restander will set us up for the late game. and then we can do something like swing here, and then even if they guard the Vanguard, the triggers we get will just go to this column and be very difficult for them to guard, and then we'll move this to Soul Draw card. So, off of one card, we potentially got 2 front row units, and we activated our Shenri. If we went second, this interaction between Shenri and the order is really important because our opponent might grade 2 rush us first, and then they'll have a board, and then activating our Shenri the hard way with the order will make sure that we still draw a card even if they called multiple units. And the more Shenris you have, the more powerful this turn gets. And it's pretty likely that we actually don't need to call this off the Latifah. It's pretty likely that we can actually just use Latifah to get Shenris, and that we'll have a grade 2 already because we are playing 10 grade 2 units. So the odds are in our favor. Plus, any copies of Tenrei we find we'll be able to activate because we haven't spent any counterblasts. So if we want to, we can spend the counterblast on this to draw a card. And we can also deck thin significantly. So that's the main argument for playing the order package, is this easy to build early rush turn that doesn't cost any counterblasts unless we want it to with Tenrei. Hopefully this video is informative. Another factor of this deck that I didn't mention until this point is that this package is significantly cheaper. As of the recording of this video, Forward and Revertus is about $25, which means it's about $100 for a set. Meanwhile, Latifah is about $10, and this order is a common, so I assume you can probably even get these for free off of your friends if they opened any of this set. So $40 for this, and then you could probably get these for very cheap or free, means that you essentially have the basics of the order package, because this grade 1, while nice, is not essential. You can skip it and play other stuff if you want. You can have the basics of your grade 2 game package for very, very affordable numbers. You probably already have Shenris if you played Shiranui. Versus spending $100 for Forward and Revertus for a playset. $75 if you're only going to play 3. So in terms of dollar per win, the order package wins out clearly. In terms of playing around opponents' counterplay options for Shiranui, like damage denial and like not calling a board, this version wins out clearly, because this order gets stronger the fewer units your opponent calls. If your opponent ever tries to deny you dominate targets by simply calling nothing or bouncing everything, this order becomes a very potent effect. Whereas the downside of this list is we can't play the Energy Cycler, so we lose out on some early card draw and some early defense, or in some late game defense. And Forward and Revertus is a very powerful card. It has definitely earned its $25 price tag. I think it was $40 at one point too. Forward and Revertus can reuse Shenri, which is a very powerful interaction. So it's definitely worth considering if you have the resources to get Forward and Revertus. But if not, and you still want to play Shiranui, but you don't want to spend a ton of money on cards now that the ban list update is coming out, I would strongly recommend trying this order package out. It's also quite fun to play. Latifah is a very cool looking card, and there's something very funny about defeating your opponent with a barbecue with the homeboys. So, that's the profile. I hope this was informative, and I know that Shiranui players will still be going strong after this ban list update. It, in my opinion, didn't really do that much to hurt the deck's competitive viability. So if you're a person who really enjoys this deck, or maybe you got into Standard by buying the Stride deck set and it's the only deck you own, feel free to keep playing it. It's still a really powerful option in the meta. Don't be afraid of the ban. With that, good luck card fighting, and have a nice day.